October 14, 1942, dawned gray and cold over Stalingrad as Senior Lieutenant Svetlana Savitskaya completed her pre-flight inspection in the weak morning light. The city below had been reduced to rubble by months of savage fighting, but it remained in Soviet hands through the desperate courage of soldiers who refused to surrender despite overwhelming odds. The 122nd Fighter Squadron had been reduced to 8 operational aircraft through combat losses and mechanical failures, but they continued to fly daily missions against German bomber formations that attempted to provide close air support to ground forces fighting street by street through the destroyed city. Intelligence reports indicated a major German air offensive planned for that morning, with multiple bomber formations supported by the largest fighter escort yet assembled over Stalingrad. The squadron would be outnumbered by at least 4-1, but their mission remained unchanged: prevent enemy bombers from reaching their targets in the city. Svetlana had achieved 13 confirmed aerial victories since the war began, making her one of the most successful Soviet pilots and the most effective woman fighter pilot in history. Her reputation had spread throughout the Air Force, but she remained focused entirely on the tactical requirements of each mission rather than personal recognition. "Rose, you will lead the second flight today," Major Kozlov announced during the mission briefing. "Take Romanov and Petrov on your wing and engage the fighter escort while I lead the attack against the bombers. The enemy has been reinforced with some of their best pilots from France, so expect aggressive tactics and superior aircraft." The promotion to flight leader represented both an honor and a burden, as she would now be responsible for the lives of 2 other pilots in addition to accomplishing her assigned tactical objectives. Junior Lieutenant Romanov had developed into a competent pilot under her guidance, but Lieutenant Petrov was a recent replacement with minimal combat experience. "Remember," she told her wingmen during their final briefing, "our job is to disrupt the enemy formation and draw their fighters away from the bombers. Use your speed and climb rate advantages, and do not get drawn into extended turning fights where their experience can overcome our aircraft capabilities." The takeoff was routine, 8 Yak-1 fighters lifting into the overcast sky and climbing toward their patrol altitude over the city. The radio chatter was minimal as each pilot focused on aircraft systems and formation discipline while scanning the horizon for signs of the approaching enemy force. "Bandits at 11 o'clock high, multiple formations," Captain Orlov's voice crackled through her headset. "I count at least 60 aircraft, bombers and fighters. This is going to be the biggest fight we have seen." Svetlana's first glimpse of the enemy formation sent a chill through her body despite her combat experience. The German force was massive, with 3 separate bomber formations each protected by 8 fighters flying in precise tactical formations. The enemy pilots were clearly experienced, maintaining perfect discipline as they approached their target. "Rose flight, split right and engage the northern escort," Major Kozlov ordered. "Draw them away from the bombers and keep them busy while we attack the main formation." She banked her fighter to the right and climbed toward the German escort formation, her 2 wingmen following in perfect formation despite the overwhelming odds they faced. The enemy fighters had spotted their approach and were turning to meet them, their black crosses clearly visible against the gray sky. The initial engagement began at maximum range as both formations fired deflection shots without significant effect. The German pilots were flying Messerschmitt Bf 109G fighters, the latest and most capable version of their standard fighter that outperformed the Yak-1 in speed and firepower but remained inferior in turning radius and climb rate. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for decades, an 8-minute aerial combat that demonstrated the difference between good pilots and truly exceptional ones. Svetlana led her flight into the center of the German formation with a climbing attack that scattered their tactical organization and forced them into individual combat rather than coordinated mutual support. Her first victim was a Messerschmitt that attempted to dive away from her attack, not realizing that her Yak-1 could maintain pursuit in a shallow dive while gaining the energy advantage. She fired a long burst that struck the German fighter's engine and fuel tank, sending it down in flames within 30 seconds of the initial engagement. "One down," she called over the radio while simultaneously tracking 2 more German fighters that were attempting to coordinate an attack against Lieutenant Petrov. Her tactical awareness allowed her to process multiple threats while maintaining offensive pressure against her primary targets. Her second kill came 40 seconds later when she caught a Messerschmitt in a climbing turn, the German pilot trying to use his superior power-to-weight ratio to escape her guns. But Svetlana had learned to anticipate such maneuvers during her 18 months of combat experience, and she led her target perfectly to place her cannon shells into his cockpit. The German formation began to lose cohesion as their pilots realized they were facing an exceptionally skilled opponent who was systematically destroying their aircraft with clinical precision. Several fighters broke off from the engagement to escape, but Svetlana pursued them relentlessly while directing her wingmen to maintain pressure on the remaining enemy aircraft. Her third and fourth kills followed within the next minute as she caught two Messerschmitts attempting to reform into mutual support positions. Her gunnery was perfect, each burst precisely calculated to achieve maximum damage with minimum ammunition expenditure. The German pilots were experienced, but they had never encountered anyone with her combination of tactical knowledge and marksmanship skill. "My God, Rose is shot down for already." Lieutenant Romanov's voice carried over the radio with amazement and excitement. "The Germans are breaking formation and running." But the engagement was far from over. Additional German fighters were approaching from the south, drawn by the radio chatter from their comrades under attack. Svetlana had to continue fighting while managing her fuel consumption and ammunition supply that were being depleted rapidly during the intense combat. Her fifth and sixth victories came during a head-on attack against two Messerschmitts that approached in line astern formation. The German pilots expected her to break off from the dangerous closing maneuver, but instead she held her course until the last possible second before firing a concentrated burst that destroyed the leading fighter and damaged the second one severely enough to send it limping toward German territory. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex as more German fighters arrived while her own ammunition and fuel supplies continued to decrease. She had to balance aggressive pursuit of additional targets against the requirement to conserve resources for the return flight to base. Her seventh kill was achieved against a Messerschmitt that attempted to attack Lieutenant Petrov from above, not realizing that Svetlana had positioned herself perfectly to intercept the diving attack. Her deflection shot was perfect, striking the German fighter just behind the cockpit and breaking it in half with a devastating explosion. The eighth victory followed immediately as the wingman of the destroyed aircraft pulled up sharply to avoid the debris, presenting his belly to her guns at close range. She fired a short burst that set his fuel tank ablaze, sending another enemy fighter spinning toward the ground in a ball of orange flame. "Rose, you have got to disengage," Major Kozlov's voice came through her headset with urgent concern. "Your ammunition must be nearly exhausted, and more bandits are approaching from the east." But Svetlana had spotted something that changed her tactical assessment completely. A single German bomber had become separated from the main formation and was attempting to reach Stalingrad alone, flying low over the Volga River to avoid detection. If it reached the city, its bomb load could destroy a critical supply bridge that Soviet forces needed for reinforcement and resupply. She had enough ammunition remaining for one more engagement, and the isolated bomber represented a target that justified the risk of extending her combat time. She called her intentions to Major Kozlov and dove toward the river, leaving her wingmen to maintain defensive positions while she pursued the enemy bomber. The Heinkel He-111 was flying at maximum speed just above the water, its crew hoping to avoid interception by maintaining minimum altitude. But Svetlana's diving attack brought her guns to bear from the bomber's most vulnerable angle, and her final burst of cannon fire struck the aircraft's port engine and wing root with devastating effect. The German bomber rolled left and struck the river surface in a tremendous splash of water and debris, its bombs exploding underwater in a geyser that sent spray hundreds of feet into the air. The destruction of the isolated bomber marked her ninth aerial victory of the day, but, more importantly, it prevented the destruction of the vital bridge. As she climbed away from the river and turned toward home, Svetlana realized that something extraordinary had just occurred. In 8 minutes of aerial combat, she had personally destroyed 9 enemy aircraft while protecting her wingmen and preventing a critical enemy bombing attack. The engagement would soon be recognized as one of the most remarkable individual achievements in aviation history. The return flight to base was uneventful, though her fuel gauges showed dangerously low levels that required careful engine management to reach the airfield. Her wingmen had both survived the engagement unharmed, though Lieutenant Petrov had expended all his ammunition without achieving any confirmed victories. The landing was smooth despite her exhaustion and the adrenaline aftermath that left her hands trembling slightly as she shut down the engine. Ground crew personnel who had monitored the radio chatter were already gathering around her aircraft, eager to hear details of the incredible engagement. Major Kozlov was waiting for her as she climbed out of the cockpit, his expression reflecting amazement and pride at her unprecedented achievement. The entire squadron had heard the radio transmissions during the fight, and everyone understood that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. 9 confirmed kills in 8 minutes, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. The intelligence officers are going to have difficulty writing a report that anyone will believe. How did you manage such incredible shooting accuracy under those conditions? Svetlana considered her answer carefully, understanding that her performance would be analyzed and studied by military officials throughout the Soviet command structure. The honest answer involved years of preparation, training, and experience that had culminated in a perfect combination of circumstances and opportunity. I remembered everything I was taught, she replied simply. Captain Komarov taught me to understand my aircraft completely. Major Petrov taught me to remain calm under pressure. Captain Orlov taught me tactical awareness and energy management. Today I was able to apply all those lessons when the opportunity presented itself. Her modest response reflected the character that had earned respect from her squadron mates and superiors throughout her military career. She understood that individual achievement was built upon the foundation of training and support provided by many other people over many years. The debriefing session lasted for hours as intelligence officers recorded every detail of the engagement for analysis and propaganda purposes. The story of the woman pilot who had destroyed 9 enemy aircraft in 8 minutes would soon be reported throughout the Soviet Union and eventually around the world. But, for Svetlana, the most meaningful recognition came from her squadron mates who had witnessed her performance and understood its significance in professional terms. Captain Volkov approached her after the debriefing with an expression of genuine admiration and respect. I want to apologize again for my initial attitude toward you, he said quietly. Today you proved that the finest pilot in this squadron happens to be a woman. It has been an honor to serve alongside you, and I hope you will accept my friendship as well as my respect. His words reflected the complete transformation of attitudes within the squadron that had occurred gradually over her months of service. The pilots who had initially questioned her presence now competed for opportunities to fly on her wing, understanding that her tactical expertise and combat effectiveness provided the best possible chance for mission success and personal survival. The news of her achievement spread rapidly through the Soviet military command structure, reaching the highest levels of government within days. She was awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest decoration for valor, and promoted to captain in recognition of her exceptional service. But, perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in a simple change to her official records. The nickname Rose was entered as her official call sign, no longer a mockery but a badge of honor that reflected her unique identity as the deadliest woman pilot in history. Captain Svetlana Rose Savitskaya had silenced every doubter with 8 minutes of flying that demonstrated the irrelevance of gender to courage, skill, and dedication in service to one's country. Her legend would inspire generations of women who dreamed of flying among the stars, proving that no dream was impossible for those willing to work hard enough to achieve it. The girl who had pressed her face against a Moscow window had become a woman who made history in the skies above Stalingrad, forever changing assumptions about what women could accomplish when given the opportunity to prove themselves equal to any challenge. The 122nd Fighter Squadron's base at Stalingrad buzzed with activity as Junior Lieutenant Svetlana Savitskaya approached the main operations building, her orders clutched in one hand and her flight bag slung over her shoulder. Word of her arrival had spread quickly through the squadron, and she could feel the weight of curious stares from ground crew members and off-duty pilots who had gathered to catch a glimpse of the woman who had been assigned to their elite unit. Major Ivan Kozlov emerged from the operations building before she could enter, a stocky man in his late 30s with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent years in aerial combat. His reputation preceded him as one of the most skilled and demanding squadron commanders in the Soviet Air Force, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War who had personally shot down 7 enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Savitskaya, he said, returning her salute with military precision. Welcome to the 122nd Fighter Squadron. I have heard exceptional things about your training performance, and I specifically requested your assignment to this unit. I hope you are prepared to prove that my confidence in your abilities is justified. His tone was formal but not unfriendly, suggesting neither favoritism nor hostility. Svetlana appreciated his direct approach, understanding that she would be evaluated solely on her performance rather than her gender. "Thank you, Comrade Major," she replied. "I am ready to serve and contribute to the squadron's mission in whatever capacity you deem appropriate." Major Kozlov led her into the operations building, where a dozen pilots were gathered around a large map table discussing the day's training missions. Conversation stopped abruptly as they entered, every head turning to examine the new arrival. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the pilots studied her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to barely concealed disapproval. "Gentlemen," Major Kozlov announced, "this is Junior Lieutenant Savitskaya, our new pilot. She graduated at the top of her training class and comes to us with exceptional recommendations from her instructors. I expect you to treat her with the same professionalism you show all squadron members." Captain Boris Volkov stepped forward from the group of pilots, and Svetlana recognized him immediately as one of her former classmates from training. His presence in the squadron was both familiar and concerning, knowing his previous attitudes about women in combat aviation. Well, Volkov said with a smirk that bordered on insubordination. "If it isn't our flower from flight school. I suppose they have run out of real pilots and decided to send us garden decorations instead." Several pilots chuckled at his comment, though others remained silent and watchful. Major Kozlov's expression darkened at the breach of military courtesy, but before he could respond, Svetlana stepped forward to address Volkov directly. "Captain Volkov," she said calmly, "I remember your gunnery scores from training. Perhaps when I am settled in, you could provide some instruction on how to improve my marksmanship. I would hate to embarrass the squadron by only achieving superior ratings instead of perfect ones." The subtle reminder of his mediocre performance during training drew quiet laughter from several pilots who remembered Svetlana's exceptional gunnery scores. Volkov's face flushed red, but he could not respond without admitting that a woman had outperformed him in a critical combat skill. Major Kozlov seized the moment to reassert his authority over the situation. "Captain Volkov, you will assign Lieutenant Savitskaya to quarters and brief her on squadron procedures. Any further displays of discourtesy will result in disciplinary action that I guarantee you will not enjoy." The tension in the room was palpable, but the message was clear. The squadron commander supported the new pilot, and any challenges to her presence would be dealt with severely. The other pilots began to disperse to their various duties, though many continued to cast curious glances in Svetlana's direction. Over the following weeks, Svetlana worked methodically to establish herself within the squadron's complex social and professional hierarchy. The pilots were divided into several informal groups based on experience, background, and personality, each with its own internal dynamics and relationships. The senior pilots, led by Captain Dmitry Orlov, were experienced combat veterans who had fought in Spain and understood the deadly realities of aerial warfare. They evaluated new personnel based solely on competence and reliability, caring little about personal characteristics that did not affect combat performance. The middle group consisted of pilots with moderate experience who had completed advanced training but had not yet seen extensive combat. They were eager to prove themselves and sometimes resentful of attention given to newer pilots who might advance more rapidly than they had. The junior pilots were recent graduates like herself, still learning their roles within the squadron and working to demonstrate their abilities to more experienced colleagues. This group was most likely to accept her presence without prejudice, since they were all struggling to establish themselves professionally. Captain Volkov commanded a small faction of pilots who shared his traditional views about women in military service. They were not openly hostile, understanding the consequences of defying their commander's clear support for the new pilot, but they maintained distance and skepticism about her abilities. Svetlana's strategy was to focus entirely on professional performance while gradually building relationships with pilots who evaluated her fairly. She volunteered for additional duties, studied squadron tactics and procedures intensively, and demonstrated consistent competence in every aspect of her responsibilities. Her first flight with the squadron came during a routine training mission designed to familiarize her with local flying conditions and squadron formation procedures. She was assigned to fly wing position with Captain Orlov, a demanding pilot who expected absolute precision from anyone flying in formation with him. The mission involved navigation exercises, combat formation practice, and gunnery training at a remote range where pilots could practice their marksmanship skills with live ammunition. For Svetlana, it was an opportunity to demonstrate the abilities that had earned her assignment to the squadron. Captain Orlov's evaluation was thorough and unforgiving. He tested her reaction time, formation discipline, navigation accuracy, and gunnery precision under various conditions. He pushed her aircraft to its performance limits, executed unexpected maneuvers, and created challenging situations that required split-second decision-making. When they returned to base, Captain Orlov's report to Major Kozlov was brief and decisive. The new pilot flies better than most of the men in this squadron. Her gunnery is exceptional, her formation discipline is perfect, and her aircraft handling demonstrates natural talent combined with excellent training. I recommend immediate assignment to full combat status. Word of Captain Orlov's assessment spread quickly through the squadron, carrying significant weight due to his reputation for demanding standards and honest evaluations. Several pilots who had remained skeptical about Svetlana's abilities began to reconsider their positions, understanding that Orlov would never provide false praise to anyone regardless of political pressure. But her success also intensified opposition from pilots like Volkov who felt threatened by her competence. They began referring to her mockingly as Rose, a nickname that emphasized her femininity while diminishing her professional identity. The name caught on among some squadron members, though others continued to use her proper rank and surname. "Here comes Rose," Volkov would announce whenever she entered the pilot's ready room. "I hope the enemy is impressed by how pretty our formations look when she is flying with us." The nickname stung because it reduced her to a gender stereotype rather than recognizing her as a qualified pilot. But Svetlana chose not to respond directly to the provocation, understanding that any emotional reaction would only reinforce the stereotype that women were too sensitive for military service. Instead, she continued to excel in every aspect of squadron life. Her technical knowledge impressed maintenance personnel who worked on her aircraft. Her flying skills earned respect from air traffic controllers who appreciated her precise radio procedures and navigation accuracy. Her dedication to continuous improvement set an example that inspired some of the younger pilots. The political situation in Europe was deteriorating rapidly as Germany expanded its territorial ambitions and military capabilities. Soviet intelligence reports indicated that conflict was increasingly likely, and fighter squadrons throughout the country were being prepared for potential combat operations. Training intensified significantly as pilots practiced combat tactics, emergency procedures, and coordination with ground forces. The squadron received newer and more capable aircraft, including early models of the Yak-1 fighter that represented the latest in Soviet aviation technology. Svetlana was among the first pilots selected to transition to the new aircraft, a recognition of her exceptional performance and the squadron commander's confidence in her abilities. The Yak-1 was faster, more maneuverable, and better armed than previous fighters, but it also required greater skill and experience to operate effectively. Her checkout flights in the Yak-1 went smoothly, confirming her ability to master any aircraft she was given to fly. The improved performance and capabilities of the new fighter excited her, representing the kind of advanced technology she had dreamed about during her years of preparation for military service. As 1941 progressed, intelligence reports became increasingly ominous. German forces were massing along the Soviet border, and diplomatic efforts to maintain peace appeared to be failing. The 122nd Fighter Squadron was placed on increased readiness status, with pilots required to remain close to their aircraft and prepared for immediate combat operations. The tension affected everyone differently. Some pilots became more serious and focused, understanding that their training was about to be tested under life-and-death conditions. Others became more lighthearted, using humor to cope with the stress of knowing that combat was imminent. Svetlana found herself thinking often about her family in Moscow and the long journey that had brought her to this point. She wrote letters home describing her squadron life in general terms while avoiding any details that might worry her parents or violate military security requirements. Her mother's letters expressed pride mixed with fear, knowing that her daughter was serving in a dangerous role but unable to fully understand the nature of military aviation. Her father's letters were more technical, asking about her aircraft and her experiences as a way of maintaining their shared connection to aviation. Captain Volkov continued his campaign of subtle harassment, though always within bounds that would not attract disciplinary action from Major Kozlov. He questioned her readiness for combat, suggested that she would panic under pressure, and predicted that she would request transfer to safer duties once real fighting began. Flying around in peacetime is easy enough, he told other pilots within her hearing. But when enemy fighters are trying to kill you, when your friends are burning and dying around you, that is when we will see what our rose is really made of. His words carried additional sting because they echoed her own private concerns about how she would perform under actual combat conditions. No amount of training could fully prepare someone for the psychological shock of aerial warfare, and she wondered if she possessed the mental toughness necessary to function effectively when death was a constant possibility. But she also remembered the years of preparation that had brought her to this point, the obstacles she had overcome, and the skills she had developed through dedication and hard work. She had proven herself capable of meeting every challenge so far, and she was determined to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. The squadron received new orders in mid-June 1941, directing them to forward positions closer to the German border. The move was presented as a routine training deployment, but everyone understood that war was imminent and that they would soon be flying combat missions rather than practice exercises. As they prepared for the move, Svetlana packed her few personal possessions and checked her aircraft one final time. The Yak-1 fighter was fueled, armed, and ready for whatever missions lay ahead. Her skills were as sharp as intensive training could make them. Major Kozlov gathered the squadron for a final briefing before their departure, his expression grave as he addressed the pilots who would soon be tested in actual combat. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, nodding respectfully toward Svetlana, "we are moving forward to defend our motherland. Some of us may not survive the battles ahead, but all of us will do our duty with honor. I am proud to serve with each of you, and I am confident that the 122nd Fighter Squadron will distinguish itself in the fighting to come." The pilots dispersed to their aircraft, each lost in private thoughts about the unknown challenges ahead. Svetlana climbed into her cockpit and began the familiar routine of pre-flight checks, her hands moving automatically through procedures she had practiced thousands of times. As her engine roared to life and she taxied toward the runway, she thought about the girl who had pressed her face against a Moscow window 12 years earlier, dreaming of flying among the clouds. That girl had become a woman and a pilot, ready to defend her country with the skills and courage she had spent her entire life developing. The war was about to begin, and Junior Lieutenant Svetlana Savitskaya was ready to fight. The morning of June 22, 1941, shattered the pre-dawn quiet at the forward airbase with the distant rumble of artillery fire and the urgent wailing of air raid sirens. Svetlana bolted upright in her bunk as the operations klaxon began its harsh warning cycle, the sound that every pilot had been trained to recognize as the signal for immediate combat scramble. Outside the barracks windows, the eastern horizon glowed with the orange flashes of explosions as German artillery opened the largest military offensive in human history. Operation Barbarossa had begun, and 3 million German soldiers were pouring across the Soviet border in a coordinated attack that stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. All pilots to aircraft. This is not a drill. Major Kozlov's voice boomed through the base loudspeaker system. German forces have crossed the border. All squadron aircraft will scramble immediately for combat air patrol over Stalingrad. Svetlana pulled on her flight suit with practiced efficiency, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror as she realized that her first combat mission was beginning. Around her, other pilots were conducting the same hurried preparations, their faces reflecting the same combination of fear and determination that she felt coursing through her body. The flight line was controlled chaos as ground crews worked frantically to prepare aircraft for immediate departure. Engines roared to life across the airfield as pilots completed abbreviated pre-flight checks and taxied toward the runway. Radio chatter filled the airways with urgent updates about enemy positions and rapidly changing tactical situations. Svetlana reached her Yak-1 fighter to find the ground crew already completing final preparations, fuel tanks topped off and ammunition belts loaded with the deadly rounds she might soon fire in anger for the first time. Her crew chief, Sergeant Petrov, handed her the mission briefing and wished her luck with the serious expression of a man who understood the dangers she was about to face. "The aircraft is perfect, Lieutenant," he told her, shouting over the noise of nearby engines. "She will not let you down if you fly her properly. Bring her back to us safely. The briefing was simple and terrifying. German bomber formations were approaching Stalingrad from the west, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters that outnumbered the available Soviet defenders by more than 3-1. The 122nd Fighter Squadron would intercept the enemy formations and attempt to prevent them from reaching their targets in the city. Major Kozlov led the formation takeoff, 12 Yak-1 fighters climbing rapidly into the morning sky as they headed west to meet the incoming German attack. Svetlana flew in the number 3 position of the second flight, her aircraft responding smoothly to her control inputs as they gained altitude and speed. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high," called Captain Orlov, his voice crackling through the radio static. "Multiple formations, fighters and bombers. This is what we have trained for, comrades. Remember your tactics and trust your aircraft." Svetlana's first glimpse of enemy aircraft sent a shock of adrenaline through her system. The German formations were larger than anything she had encountered during training, black dots against the morning sky that resolved into dozens of bombers protected by swarms of single-engine fighters. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, representing the power and organization of the military machine that had conquered most of Europe. The initial engagement happened with shocking speed and violence. Major Kozlov led the attack against the bomber formation while Captain Orlov's flight engaged the escorting fighters. Svetlana found herself locked in a turning fight with a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the German pilot demonstrating the skill and experience that had made the Luftwaffe legendary throughout Europe. Her training took over as her conscious mind struggled to process the overwhelming sensory input of her first aerial combat. The Messerschmitt was fast and maneuverable, but her Yak-1 could turn tighter and climb more rapidly. The German pilot was experienced, but she had trained extensively in aerobatics and gunnery that gave her advantages in close-range maneuvering combat. The fight lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours as the two aircraft twisted through the sky in a deadly dance of attack and evasion. Svetlana fired several bursts at maximum range without hitting her target, the Messerschmitt's pilot using his experience to avoid her gunfire while positioning for shots of his own. She could hear her father's voice from years earlier, explaining how pilots needed to understand their machines completely in order to push them to their limits safely. She could hear Captain Komarov's lessons about deflection shooting and energy management. She could hear Major Petrov's training about staying calm under pressure and making precise control inputs. The breakthrough came when the German pilot attempted a climbing turn that bled too much airspeed from his aircraft. Svetlana recognized the mistake instantly and pulled her fighter into a tight climbing turn that brought her guns to bear from less than 100 meters range. Her fingers squeezed the trigger, and her cannon and machine guns erupted in a deadly stream that struck the Messerschmitt's engine and cockpit. The German fighter rolled over and began a smoking dive toward the ground, its pilot either dead or unconscious. Svetlana watched the aircraft impact in a farmer's field, feeling a complex mixture of triumph and horror at having killed another human being in combat for the first time. "Good shooting, Rose." Captain Volkov's voice came through her headset, using her squadron nickname for the first time without mockery. "That was a clean kill. Stay alert, there are more bandits in the area." The radio call shocked her almost as much as her first victory. Volkov had witnessed her performance under the ultimate test and found it worthy of respect. The use of her nickname carried a different meaning now, no longer a diminishment but a recognition of her unique identity within the squadron. The air battle continued for another 20 minutes as Soviet and German fighters engaged in individual combats across the sky above Stalingrad. Svetlana managed to damage 2 more enemy aircraft without achieving additional confirmed kills, but her performance throughout the engagement impressed the veteran pilots who fought alongside her. When the surviving Soviet fighters returned to base, they had successfully disrupted the German bomber attack and shot down 8 enemy aircraft while losing 3 of their own pilots. Svetlana's confirmed kill made her the first woman in Soviet history to destroy an enemy aircraft in aerial combat, a distinction that would soon be reported throughout the Soviet military command structure. Major Kozlov debriefed each pilot individually, analyzing their performance and identifying areas for improvement based on their first taste of actual combat. When Svetlana entered his office, he gestured for her to sit down and opened her file to record the day's events. "Your performance today was exemplary, Lieutenant," he began, his voice reflecting genuine pride in her accomplishment. Your first kill was achieved through superior tactics and marksmanship, exactly the kind of fighting we need from every pilot in this squadron. How do you feel about the experience? Svetlana considered her answer carefully, understanding that her response would influence her future assignments and responsibilities within the squadron. The honest answer was complicated, involving pride at her success mixed with horror at the reality of killing and fear about future combat missions. I feel ready to continue serving, Comrade Major, she replied. The enemy pilots are skilled and experienced, but our aircraft and training are adequate to achieve victory if we maintain discipline and use proper tactics. Her response demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking and emotional control that marked successful combat pilots. Major Kozlov noted her assessment in her file and assigned her to the next day's mission roster, confident that she could handle whatever challenges the continuing war might present. The evening brought celebration and mourning in equal measure as the squadron gathered to commemorate their first combat mission. The 3 pilots who had been killed were remembered with toasts and stories about their service and friendship. The successful missions were analyzed and discussed to identify lessons that might improve future performance. Svetlana found herself accepted into the group conversations in a way that had not happened before her combat baptism. The veteran pilots asked her opinion about enemy tactics and aircraft performance. The newer pilots sought her advice about managing fear and maintaining focus during aerial combat. Captain Volkov approached her as the evening wound down, his expression serious but no longer hostile. She prepared herself for another confrontation, but his words surprised her with their sincerity and respect. I owe you an apology, Lieutenant, he said quietly. I was wrong about your abilities and your place in this squadron. Your performance today proved that courage and skill are not limited by gender. I hope you will accept my apology and allow me to treat you as the fine pilot you have proven yourself to be. His apology was witnessed by several other pilots, marking a significant change in squadron dynamics that had been building since her arrival. The remaining holdouts against her presence began to reconsider their positions, understanding that combat performance was the only measure that mattered in their deadly profession. The next few weeks brought daily combat missions as the German advance continued deeper into Soviet territory. Svetlana flew in every available sortie, accumulating experience and additional victories while building her reputation as one of the most effective pilots in the squadron. Her second kill came during a bomber interception mission when she attacked a Heinkel He-111 from close range, setting the aircraft on fire with a concentrated burst of cannon shells. Her third victory was achieved against a Messerschmitt Bf-110 heavy fighter that she caught during a climbing attack on a Soviet bomber formation. Each combat mission taught her new lessons about aerial warfare, enemy tactics, and her own capabilities under stress. She learned to manage her fear and channel it into heightened awareness and sharper reflexes. She developed an instinctive understanding of energy management and deflection shooting that made her increasingly dangerous to enemy pilots. The other squadron members began to rely on her exceptional eyesight and tactical awareness during combat missions. She frequently spotted enemy aircraft before anyone else and provided early warning that allowed the formation to position themselves advantageously for attack or defense. Her reputation spread beyond the 122nd Fighter Squadron as mission reports detailed her consistent performance and growing list of aerial victories. Senior officers took notice of the woman pilot who was proving that gender had no relevance to combat effectiveness in aerial warfare. But personal success could not mask the larger strategic situation that was deteriorating rapidly for the Soviet Union. German forces were advancing on multiple fronts, capturing entire armies and threatening major cities including Moscow and Leningrad. The Air Force was suffering devastating losses as experienced pilots were killed faster than new ones could be trained. The 122nd Fighter Squadron was gradually reinforced with replacement pilots, most of them young men with minimal training who struggled to survive their first few combat missions. Svetlana found herself serving as an informal instructor and mentor to these new pilots, sharing the hard-won experience that had kept her alive through dozens of aerial combats. Her most important student was Junior Lieutenant Alexei Romanov, a 19-year-old pilot from Ukraine who had completed only basic flight training before being assigned to the squadron. He was technically competent but lacked the confidence and tactical awareness necessary for survival in aerial combat. "Stay close to my wing," she told him before their first mission together. "Watch everything I do, and do not try to be a hero during your first few flights. Your job is to learn how to stay alive long enough to become an effective fighter pilot." Romanov survived his initial combat missions by following her guidance precisely, learning through observation and gradual participation in increasingly complex tactical situations. Several other new pilots requested assignment to her flight, understanding that flying with the experienced Rose offered their best chance of surviving their dangerous apprenticeship. The psychological pressure of daily combat began to affect every pilot in the squadron differently. Some became increasingly aggressive and reckless, seeking decisive action that might end their personal war quickly. Others became cautious and defensive, focusing on survival rather than achieving tactical objectives. Svetlana found herself maintaining steady performance through a combination of professional discipline and personal motivation that kept her focused on mission accomplishment rather than personal fears. She had worked too hard to reach this position to allow fear to compromise her effectiveness. By October 1941, she had achieved 8 confirmed aerial victories and probably destroyed several additional enemy aircraft that could not be verified due to combat conditions. Her success had earned her promotion to senior lieutenant and recognition as one of the most effective fighter pilots in the Soviet Air Force. But her greatest test was still ahead, waiting in the gray October sky above Stalingrad, where 24 German fighters would soon learn why the woman they mocked as Rose had become one of the most feared pilots on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Air Force training facility at Balashov stretched across the frozen landscape like a military city, its runways cutting precise lines through the snow-covered steppes. Svetlana stepped off the transport truck with 11 other new recruits, her breath forming clouds in the bitter February air of 1940. The other candidates were all men, their faces reflecting the same mixture of excitement and nervousness that she felt pounding in her chest. Flight instructor Major Alexei Petrov stood waiting for them beside the main hangar, his uniform immaculate despite the harsh wind that whipped across the airfield. His reputation preceded him as one of the most demanding and effective training officers in the Soviet Air Force, a man who had personally trained some of the finest pilots serving in the rapidly expanding military aviation program. "Welcome to hell, comrades," Major Petrov announced, his voice carrying clearly over the wind. "For the next 18 months, you belong to me. Some of you will earn your wings and become pilots worthy of defending the motherland. Others will wash out and return to whatever meaningless lives you left behind. The aircraft do not care about your feelings, your fears, or your excuses. They respond only to competence, courage, and absolute precision." His cold gaze moved methodically from one recruit to another, pausing when he reached Svetlana. She met his stare directly, neither challenging nor submissive, maintaining the composure she had learned during her years of preparation. "Cadet Savitskaya," he said, using her surname without any indication of surprise or displeasure at her presence. "You are the first woman admitted to this program. I will treat you exactly like every other cadet here. That means you will receive no special consideration, no reduced expectations, and no sympathy if you cannot meet the standards required of a Soviet pilot. Are we understood?" "Yes, Comrade Major," she replied, her voice steady and clear. The first weeks of training focused on ground school instruction that covered every aspect of aviation theory and practice. The recruits studied meteorology, navigation, aircraft systems, radio procedures, and military tactics for 12 hours each day. The pace was relentless, designed to overwhelm and eliminate candidates who lacked the mental capacity or dedication necessary for military aviation. Svetlana excelled in every subject, her years of informal education at the airfield providing a solid foundation that allowed her to grasp new concepts quickly. While other cadets struggled with complex navigation calculations or aircraft system diagrams, she demonstrated understanding that impressed even the most skeptical instructors. But academic performance was only one aspect of pilot training. Physical conditioning demanded strength, endurance, and coordination that pushed every cadet to their limits. The daily routine included calisthenics, long-distance running, gymnastics, and specialized exercises designed to develop the reflexes and spatial awareness essential for aerial combat. The other cadets watched Svetlana carefully during physical training, waiting for signs that she could not keep pace with their performance. They expected her to struggle with the strength requirements, to fall behind during endurance exercises, to demonstrate the physical limitations that they assumed were inherent to her gender. Instead, she consistently ranked among the top performers in every category. Her smaller size actually provided advantages in some exercises requiring agility and coordination. Her determination pushed her through challenges that defeated larger and, apparently stronger candidates. Her preparation and mental toughness allowed her to maintain focus and performance even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. By the end of the first month, 3 cadets had voluntarily withdrawn from the program, unable to cope with the demands and pressure. Svetlana remained, earning grudging respect from her fellow trainees and cautious approval from the instructional staff. Her first flight came on a cold March morning when Major Petrov personally took her up in a training aircraft to evaluate her natural abilities and reactions. The Polikarpov P-2 was a simple biplane used for basic instruction, forgiving in its handling characteristics but demanding in its requirement for precise control inputs. "Remember, cadet," Major Petrov said as they climbed into the aircraft, "this machine will amplify every mistake you make. Hesitation, over-control, imprecision will all be immediately apparent. The aircraft cannot lie about your abilities." As the engine roared to life and they began their takeoff roll, Svetlana felt a surge of emotion that almost overwhelmed her concentration. After 12 years of dreaming about this moment, she was finally at the controls of an aircraft, feeling the responsibility and power that came with pilot authority. The takeoff was smooth, her control inputs gentle but confident as the aircraft lifted away from the runway and climbed into the clear winter sky. Major Petrov had her perform basic maneuvers, turns, climbs, descents, and approaches to landing. He watched her technique carefully, noting how quickly she adapted to the aircraft's responses and how naturally she seemed to understand the relationship between control inputs and aircraft behavior. "You have good instincts," he told her after they landed. "Better than most of the men in your class. But instincts alone will not make you a fighter pilot. The real training begins now." Advanced flight instruction introduced increasingly complex maneuvers and emergency procedures. Svetlana learned aerobatics, formation flying, navigation by instruments alone, and night flying techniques. Each lesson built upon previous skills while introducing new challenges that demanded greater precision and confidence. The other cadets began to acknowledge her abilities as they flew training missions together. Her formation flying was exceptionally smooth, her navigation consistently accurate, and her emergency procedures executed with calm professionalism that impressed instructors and fellow students alike. But social acceptance came more slowly than professional recognition. Many of the male cadets struggled with having a woman among their ranks, unsure how to interact with someone who challenged their assumptions about gender roles and capabilities. Some maintained respectful distance, others attempted awkward friendships, and a few continued to view her presence as an unwelcome intrusion. Cadet Boris Volkov emerged as her most persistent critic, a tall, arrogant young man from a military family who believed that women had no place in combat aviation. He challenged her performance, questioned her motivation, and made comments designed to undermine her confidence and standing with the other cadets. "Flying pretty loops around the training field is one thing," he told her after a particularly successful aerobatics session. "But when bullets start flying and men start dying, you will discover what real pressure feels like. This is all just playing games compared to actual combat." Svetlana refused to be drawn into arguments with Volkov or anyone else who questioned her presence in the program. She focused exclusively on her training, determined to prove her worth through performance rather than debate. Her consistency and competence gradually won over most of the doubters, though some like Volkov remained unconvinced. Combat training introduced weapons systems, gunnery practice, and tactical maneuvers designed to prepare pilots for aerial warfare. The cadets learned to operate machine guns, practice bombing runs, and execute attack formations that required split-second timing and absolute trust in their fellow pilots. Svetlana's gunnery scores were among the highest in the class, her natural hand-eye coordination translating perfectly to aerial marksmanship. She demonstrated exceptional ability to track moving targets while maneuvering her own aircraft, a skill that separated competent pilots from truly dangerous ones. The tactical exercises revealed another of her strengths, situational awareness and strategic thinking that allowed her to anticipate enemy movements and position herself advantageously during mock combat scenarios. Instructors noted her ability to remain calm under pressure and make rapid decisions based on incomplete information. As graduation approached, the cadets faced final examinations that tested every aspect of their training. Written tests covered technical knowledge and military procedures. Flight tests required demonstration of every skill they had learned, performed to exacting standards under the critical observation of senior officers. Major Petrov administered Svetlana's final flight examination personally, accompanying her on a comprehensive mission that included navigation, aerobatics, emergency procedures, and simulated combat maneuvers. For 2 hours, she demonstrated the skills and knowledge accumulated over 18 months of intensive training. When they landed, Major Petrov remained silent for several minutes, completing his evaluation notes while Svetlana waited nervously for his assessment. Finally, he looked up from his clipboard and studied her with the same penetrating gaze she remembered from her first day at the facility. "Cadet Savitskaya," he said formally, "you have successfully completed all requirements for graduation from this training program. Your flying skills are exceptional, your knowledge comprehensive, and your attitude professional. You will be commissioned as a junior lieutenant in the Soviet Air Force and assigned to operational duties." The graduation ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning, with families and military officials gathering to witness the commissioning of the newest Soviet pilots. Svetlana's parents made the long journey from Moscow to attend, her father wearing his best suit and her mother struggling to contain her pride and worry. As she stood with 10 other graduates receiving their wings and commissions, Svetlana thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 cadets had failed to meet the standards and been dismissed from the program, but she had not only survived but excelled in every aspect of training. The ceremony concluded with individual assignments to operational units throughout the Soviet Air Force. Most of the new pilots were assigned to bomber or transport squadrons where they would gain experience before advancing to more demanding roles. But Svetlana received orders that surprised everyone present. "Junior Lieutenant Savitskaya," announced the commanding general, "you are assigned to the 122nd Fighter Squadron, currently stationed at Stalingrad. Your reputation has preceded you, and your new commander has specifically requested your assignment to his unit." Fighter aviation represented the most elite and demanding branch of military flying, reserved for pilots with exceptional skills and proven courage. The assignment was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility, marking Svetlana as one of the finest pilots to graduate from the training program. As she packed her belongings for travel to Stalingrad, her father presented her with a small photograph of the aircraft she had watched as a child at the Moscow airfield. On the back, he had written a simple message, "For the girl who never stopped dreaming of flying." The train journey to Stalingrad gave her time to reflect on the transformation she had undergone during her training. She had entered the program as an enthusiastic young woman with dreams and theoretical knowledge. She was leaving as a qualified military pilot with the skills and confidence necessary to operate the most advanced fighter aircraft in the Soviet inventory. But she also understood that her real challenges were just beginning. Fighter squadrons were typically the most masculine and traditional units in the military, where acceptance would be even more difficult than it had been during training. She would be flying in combat situations where mistakes could be fatal and where her abilities would be tested under the most demanding conditions possible. The 122nd Fighter Squadron had a reputation as an elite unit with a distinguished combat record and high standards for pilot performance. Her new squadron commander, Major Ivan Kozlov, was known as a demanding leader who expected excellence from every pilot under his command. As the train approached Stalingrad, Svetlana could see aircraft in the distance, fighter planes conducting training missions over the city that would soon become one of the most important battlegrounds of the coming war. She was about to join these pilots as an equal, ready to prove that her gender was irrelevant to her ability to serve and fight for her country. The station platform was crowded with military personnel and civilians when her train pulled to a stop. Svetlana gathered her belongings and prepared to report to her new assignment, knowing that her arrival would create curiosity and skepticism among the experienced combat pilots of the 122nd Fighter Squadron. She was ready for their doubts, their tests, and their challenges. She had spent too many years preparing for this opportunity to be intimidated by anything except the possibility of failure. And failure, she had decided long ago, was not an option she would accept. Svetlana Mikhailovna Savitskaya pressed her face against the cold window of the Moscow apartment, watching the small aircraft trace lazy circles in the autumn sky of 1936. At 8 years old, she already knew what she wanted to become, though everyone around her insisted it was impossible. Girls did not become pilots in Soviet Russia. Girls did not soar through clouds or dance with death among the stars. Her father, Mikhail Savitsky, worked as a maintenance supervisor at a local airfield. Every evening, he would return home with stories of the brave men who flew the powerful machines, their faces weathered by wind and their eyes bright with the thrill of flight. Svetlana would sit at his feet, absorbing every word, every detail about altitude and speed and the feeling of breaking free from the bonds of Earth. "Papa," she would ask night after night, "when can I learn to fly?" Her father would smile sadly and ruffle her dark hair. "Flying is for men, little dove. Women have other purposes, other dreams they should pursue." But Svetlana's dreams refused to be redirected toward cooking or sewing or any of the traditional paths expected of young Soviet women. During the day, while her mother attended to household duties, Svetlana would sneak to the nearby airfield where her father worked. She would hide behind hangars and maintenance buildings, studying the aircraft with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. The pilots fascinated her most of all. She watched how they moved with confident purpose, how they checked their instruments with practiced precision, how they seemed to communicate with their machines through touch and instinct. She memorized their routines, their procedures, their casual conversations about weather patterns and flight mechanics. One particular pilot, Captain Dmitry Komarov, noticed the young girl who appeared regularly at the edge of the field. Instead of shooing her away, he began acknowledging her presence with small waves and occasional smiles. One day, as she crouched behind a fuel truck watching him perform his pre-flight inspection, he approached her directly. "You come here often, little spy," he said, his voice kind but curious. "What exactly are you watching for?" Svetlana stood up slowly, her heart pounding with excitement and terror. She had been discovered, but, instead of anger, she saw genuine interest in the pilot's weathered face. "I want to learn everything about flying," she said with the fierce honesty that only children possess. "I want to know how the engines work, how the controls respond, how you know when the weather is right for takeoff." Captain Komarov studied her for a long moment, seeing something in her intense gaze that reminded him of his own burning passion for aviation. Against regulations and conventional wisdom, he began teaching her the basics of flight theory during quiet moments at the airfield. He explained lift and thrust, drag and gravity, the delicate balance that allowed tons of metal to defy nature and soar. Svetlana absorbed every lesson with remarkable focus. She learned about weather patterns, navigation principles, and aircraft maintenance. Captain Komarov was amazed by her quick understanding and her ability to remember complex technical information after hearing it only once. As months passed, other pilots at the airfield began to notice the young girl who could discuss flight mechanics with surprising sophistication. Some dismissed her as an unusual curiosity, but others recognized something special in her determination and knowledge. She became an unofficial mascot of sorts, though always with the understanding that her dreams of actually flying were purely fantasy. Her parents gradually became aware of their daughter's activities at the airfield. Her mother, Anna Savitskaya, was horrified that her daughter was spending time in such an inappropriate environment. She demanded that Mikhail put an end to Svetlana's obsession immediately. "She needs to focus on proper subjects for a young lady," Anna insisted during heated family discussions that echoed through their small apartment. "Mathematics, literature, domestic skills. This foolish fascination with flying machines will only lead to disappointment and improper influences." But Mikhail had seen something remarkable in his daughter's passion. He had watched her demonstrate understanding of complex aviation principles that impressed experienced pilots. He had witnessed her dedication and her ability to learn quickly from every source available to her. "Perhaps," he told his wife quietly, "we should not be so quick to limit what our daughter might achieve. The world is changing, and maybe there will be opportunities for her that we cannot imagine." The family tensions continued throughout Svetlana's childhood, but she refused to abandon her dreams. She excelled in mathematics and physics at school, subjects that supported her growing understanding of aviation principles. Her teachers noted her exceptional analytical abilities and her talent for visualizing complex mechanical systems. When she turned 14, a significant change occurred in Soviet aviation policy. The government announced new programs to train pilots for the rapidly expanding Air Force, and, for the first time, these programs would include limited opportunities for women. The announcement sent shockwaves through traditional society, but it represented hope for young women like Svetlana who had never accepted the limitations placed on their gender. Svetlana's reaction to the news was immediate and determined. She approached her parents with a carefully prepared presentation of her qualifications, her knowledge, and her unwavering commitment to aviation. She had spent 6 years preparing for this moment, accumulating theoretical knowledge and practical understanding that rivaled many formally trained pilots. Her mother remained opposed, fearing for her daughter's safety and reputation in a field dominated by men. But her father, influenced by Captain Komarov and other pilots who had witnessed Svetlana's remarkable abilities, finally gave his support. "If this is truly what you want," Mikhail told his daughter, "and if you are willing to work harder than any man to prove yourself worthy, then you have my blessing to try." The application process for the Soviet Air Force training program was rigorous and competitive. Hundreds of young people applied for a handful of positions, and the physical and mental demands were designed to eliminate all but the most exceptional candidates. Svetlana approached each challenge with the methodical preparation she had learned from years of studying aviation. The written examinations covered mathematics, physics, navigation, weather theory, and aircraft mechanics. Svetlana's scores were among the highest recorded, reflecting her years of unofficial education at the airfield. The physical tests measured strength, endurance, coordination, and reflexes. She had prepared for these challenges by developing a demanding exercise routine that built both her physical capabilities and her mental toughness. But the most difficult challenge was the attitude of the male candidates and instructors who saw her presence as an unwelcome intrusion into their exclusive world. They questioned her motivation, her abilities, and her right to compete for a position that they believed should go to a man. Some of their comments were openly hostile, while others expressed paternalistic concern for her safety and well-being. Svetlana responded to every challenge with quiet determination and exceptional performance. She refused to be drawn into arguments or emotional responses that might justify their prejudices. Instead, she let her abilities speak for themselves, consistently demonstrating superior knowledge and skills. When the final selections were announced, Svetlana Mikhailovna Savitskaya was among the 12 candidates chosen for advanced pilot training. She was the only woman selected, a distinction that brought both pride and additional pressure. She would be constantly watched, constantly evaluated, constantly required to prove that her selection had been justified. As she packed her belongings for the journey to the training facility, her father presented her with a small compass that had belonged to his own father, a cavalry officer in the Imperial Russian Army. "This compass guided your grandfather through many battles," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "May it guide you safely through the skies and back home to us." Svetlana held the compass carefully, feeling the weight of her family's history and hopes. She understood that she was not just pursuing her own dreams, but opening a door that might allow other young women to follow. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to prove that courage, skill, and determination were not limited by gender. The train journey to the training facility gave her time to reflect on the long path that had brought her to this moment. From a curious 8-year-old pressing her face against a window to a determined 18-year-old about to begin one of the most challenging training programs in the world, she had never wavered from her goal. As the landscape rolled past her window, Svetlana thought about Captain Komarov and the other pilots who had believed in her potential. She thought about her father's gradual acceptance and support. She thought about her mother's fears and hopes intertwined in complex emotions that neither of them fully understood. Most of all, she thought about the aircraft waiting for her at the training facility, powerful machines that would either accept her as a worthy pilot or destroy her dreams forever. She was ready for either outcome, prepared by years of dedication and study that had shaped her into someone uniquely qualified for the challenges ahead. The training facility appeared in the distance as the train began to slow, a collection of buildings and hangars surrounded by runways and aircraft. Svetlana's heart raced with anticipation and nervousness as she gathered her belongings and prepared to step into the next phase of her journey. She had dreamed of this moment for 10 years, worked toward it with single-minded determination, and overcome countless obstacles to reach this point. Now the real test would begin, and she would finally have the chance to prove that a girl who dreamed of flying could become one of the finest pilots in the Soviet Air Force. The radio crackled with static as 24 German Messerschmitt fighters screamed through the gray October sky above Stalingrad. Below them, a single Soviet Yak-9 fighter plane climbed steadily upward, piloted by someone the enemy had learned to fear, but her own squadron still mocked. "Rose is going hunting again," sneered Captain Balkov through the radio, using the call sign that had become both her burden and her badge of honor. The other pilots laughed, their voices cutting through the communications channel like knives. They saw her feminine call sign as weakness, a joke in the masculine world of aerial combat. What happened next would be recorded in Soviet military archives as the most devastating 8 minutes in aerial combat history. A single pilot, mocked for her gender and ridiculed for her call sign, was about to prove that sometimes the most underestimated warrior becomes the most dangerous one. The sky above Stalingrad was about to run red with more than just the sunset.